Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for ReadTech's latest webinar, Upskill with ReadTech GDUFA. This is the second in our newest webinar series, Upskill with ReadTech, and you can look forward to more webinars coming throughout the summer, taking us back to the basics on some of the most important pharma labeling topics. I am Erin McDermott, and I will be your moderator today. And joining me is Gary Sainer, our subject matter expert here at ReadTech. He is the Senior Manager of Information Solutions. And Gary is also the chair of the SPL Technical Team. Just some quick logistics before we get into the webinar. Hopefully everyone is familiar with the GoToWebinar platform. But if you do have any questions, please utilize the chat box. We will be doing some frequently asked questions throughout the presentation, but if we have time at the end, we'll certainly get to your questions live. If we don't, we'll have one of our subject matter experts follow up with you directly at some point after the webinar. So definitely feel free to ask away. And of course, after the webinar, you can expect an email with the slides and a copy of the recording. Also, for anything we don't cover today, I would love to encourage you guys to take a look at our Knowledge Center under our Resources tab on readtech.com. You can look under the Drug and Biologic Product Submissions to find more content similar to this. And also, of course, please follow us on LinkedIn and Twitter for the latest updates in industry. Okay. So today we are going to cover a variety of topics that are going to kind of explain the foundation of GDUFA to you. So we'll look at the US FDA GDUFA framework, some generic drug facility self-ID requirements, generic drug facility self-ID data and submission, and how ReadTech can support you in this briefly at the end. So with that, I will hand the presentation off to Gary. Gary, thank you for joining us today and giving us your expertise on GDUFA.
All right, thank you, Erin. And we'll go back and take a look at this generic drug user fee amendment topic. I think, Erin, you and I had talked about maybe setting the groundwork, a little bit of a background to set the stage on this topic, and then we would roll into the self-ID aspect, which is just one of the aspects inside of this rather large topic, generic drug user fee. And today we had collected some questions. Erin had been pulling them out over the course of time, and we put together a presentation that has a lot of going back and forth, and she has a number of questions. So Erin, without any further ado, why don't we go over to the first question and see what we have there?
Awesome. So the number one question that we've gotten, Gary, overall, just what is the FDA GDUFA program?
Yeah, that's a good recap. Now, some people have been working with some of the self-identification, maybe over the course of the years, but didn't realize the context. And then others in the audience may be relatively new to the regulatory space. So I think what we'll do is just kind of touch on some of the key aspects of GDUFA, as the nickname is. But GDUFA really refers to that generic drug user fee amendment. And I'll slip and say GDUFA every once in a while, but you know exactly what I mean now. Going back to 2012 is when Congress first rolled out this legislation, and it was the result of interacting with certainly the FDA, industry, some input from public stakeholders and so on. And the intent was to promote safe, high quality, and affordable generic drugs. And the FDA basically is collecting some funds from the industry and using those funds and targeting those to increase their ability to review generic drug applications, make them more timely, have greater predictability. And over the course of time, it looked like, and there's a 5-year renewal period for this amendment. So it expires every 5 years. So we're into GDUFA 3. and that was passed in 2022, and that will go all the way out to 2027. So those are some very high-level metrics about and a little bit of information about the generic drug user fee amendment. Now, as to the actual fees that the FDA collects, there is a schedule. You can follow the link on the website there. We won't go into all the scenarios here, but there's a couple categories. One is for an abbreviated new drug application, design drug master file, and those would be submitted, at the time of the fees would be applied at the time of submissions of those particular documents and applications. Then there is something called a program charge. So depending on how many approved ANDAs you have, the FDA will charge a program fee, and there's a schedule there ranging from less than 6, small, in the middle there, and then up greater than 19 or 20 or larger for large. So it's significant pricing there. Significant dollars are involved. Looks like 1.6 million for a large size program, and that's on an annual basis. And then the third category, so we have these applications, we have the programs, and then we have facilities. So there are charges for each facility depending on whether it's domestic or foreign, and depending on what the business operation and the type of product that is being manufactured at that site. Now, those in the generic drug arena, you should not feel that you're being picked on by the FDA. The FDA does have users fees for many different types of products. So prescription drugs, biosimilars, over-the-counters, animal drugs, and both animal drugs and those generic animal drugs, and also including medical devices. So there's a number of user fee schedules for different types of products. With that, why don't we move on to the next question, Erin?
Great, Gary. Well, thank you for that answer. It was very thorough, a very good baseline. So now the next question that we get a lot: who is impacted by the FDA GDUFA requirements?
Yeah, so everybody wants to know, like, oh, am I am I required to comply with these charges and annual events? So it's those particular companies that are owners of abbreviated new drug application. We saw the pricing for those. And then if you are an owner of a domestic or foreign facility, basically if those particular facilities are producing APIs, final drug form, the FDFs, or the if you're operating as a contract manufacturer facility, then you would fall into this category that you would have to comply with the rules and regulations of the GDUFA activities. Let's move off to the next one here.
Okay, so what products are in scope for complying with the FDA GDUFA requirements?
So it's pretty straightforward. It does only apply to those human generic drugs, and we'll get a little bit more detail later on, but those generic drugs ranging from the active pharmaceutical ingredients, so the APIs, down to all the way up to the finished dosage forms. So, pretty straightforward answer there. The human generic drugs, if you're working with those or manufacturing those, it's pretty straightforward. Those would definitely catch your attention, and you need to read further on about how the regulations would apply and what you would need to submit as far as a fee, and what you would also need to submit as part of a data submission.
Okay, so obviously we got a lot of questions about timing as well. We get a lot of questions about timing for everything throughout the year. So Gary, could you explain to us a little bit when are the GDUFA program and facility user fees due?
Yeah, so there's actually a timing that's synchronized for the program fees that we saw earlier, and also the facility user fees. And that date is in October of every year. So before October 1, those fees need to be submitted to the FDA. Now, many times we get questions about, well, what if I'm late? I didn't make the October 1, I was on vacation and I lost track of everything. So, things happen, but you want to keep this on your calendar and not miss this date. You might actually do it, schedule it early just so it's always covered. The reason is there's some significant penalties involved that you want to avoid. So the penalty, first of all, is that your site and company appears in a FDA public list. They call it the arrears list, but it's basically the naughty list. Those companies that did not make payment on time. Now, they also have a nice list, so there's naughty and nice list. You want to be on the nice list. That means that you did have payment on time, and the FDA makes that public so you can go and see and actually confirm that everything is in place. But one of the things that happens is your company would appear on this naughty list, the arrears list. The other thing that'll happen is if you try to submit a ANDA, any updates, supplements, or so on, they will not be received by the FDA. So basically, the doors have been closed with your communication or submission of other documents to the FDA. And the last item is perhaps just as significant and could be even more significant, is that the FDA considers drugs made at that particular facility to be misbranded going forward. Now, that has some implications, meaning that you would not be able to legally ship that product across state lines. You would not be able to import that product into the U.S., so it's a customs issue. And there's some other things about being misbranded. It can be elevated. There's seizures possibly, and anyway, you just really don't want to go into that misbranded category. So with that said, October 1 is the deadline. Make sure you meet it by a couple months or early on. We're actually going to talk about a day or a deadline in May, and you might want to make your payments to coincide with that data submissions in May. So we'll get there in a minute. But before we get into some of the other topics, Aaron, I think you scheduled a poll question, so now would probably be a good time.
Okay, excellent, Gary. So I am going to launch the first poll right now. And the question for our poll is, how is your personal role related to GDUFA activity within your organization? Responsible for completing submissions or ensuring compliance? Involved in completing submissions or ensuring compliance? Supporting colleagues that make submissions? Involved in compliance but not in GDUFA submissions? Or not involved, I just want to gain an understanding of GDUFA. Okay, so we'll give everybody a few seconds to answer that, maybe about another 20 or 30 seconds. We usually like to keep our answers shorter than this, so I'll give everyone an extra couple seconds to kind of make up for that as well. But I wanted to make sure that I was getting the point across.
All right.
So just about another 5 or 10 seconds. I'm going to go ahead and close this poll. Okay. So Gary, it looks like we have about 30% responsible, 30% involved, 30% involved in compliance but not in GDUFA, and then 15% not involved but just went to gain an understanding, which we also love. Happy to have you guys here.
Yeah, well, that's good. That's a really good mix. Hopefully we'll enrich some of the education in those people that are trying to understand this, or it might be a refresher, and that's totally fine. Many times there's new people as well. All right, so let's turn our attention now a little bit different than our previous discussion. We were looking at a very high level of the amendment at an overall high level aspect, and try to see what the GDUFA was all about. Now, a portion of the GDUFA text and phrases talks about some self-identification. And Aaron, I think we'll move into that particular topic. You had a question lined up for the generic drug facility self-ID. So let's go to that one.
So very simply, what is the generic drug facility self-ID, and how does that relate back to FDA GDUFA?
Yeah, so it's integrated. It's a portion of FDA GDUFA. So this Amendments Act that rolled out in 2012 had all those user fees that we talked about for the programs and abbreviated new drug applications and facilities and so on. So that was all kind of funding and monetary discussion. The drug facility self-ID is a little bit different, where now they want the FDA wants to receive information about the facility. So this is collected on an annual basis, and they want to have a very good inventory of all the facilities, the various sites involved, have visibility into the supply chain, and then depending on the number of sites, this goes into some calculations and would affect the annual facility fee. So depending on the number of sites, and the workload that the FDA has, they do some gyrations and come up with some kind of algorithm to set the annual facility fees. The third area is also regarding some of the inspections. So having the generic drug facilities identify themselves as such, then they can keep a very close eye, an accurate eye, just on those particular facilities, and would affect their inspections as well. So depending on the counts, they know how to staff up, how to make visits and that sort of thing. If we were to look at a roadmap over the course of time, the FDA, starting in 2005, started to roll out a number of documents based on structured product labeling. So this is an XML-based standard from Health Level 7. And they started to collect drug information and facility information using that particular standard. And in 2012 is when this, what we refer to as SPL SID for self-identification for a generic facility, that came into play. And it's been with us ever since. And it's been added with a number of different SPL types. And Aaron, maybe on another webinar, we'll talk more about some of those. But let's move on to your next question there. Actually, I think I went back. Bear with me a second. Here we go.
So Gary, what drug facilities need to comply with SID?
Well, that's a good one. So just like the question earlier about if I'm a manufacturer, do I need to comply with the user fees? The same question comes up. Well, okay, do I need to comply with the self-identification requirements? There's two very simple, basic questions that kind of get you into the arena and would apply to most drug facilities. If you answer both of these questions with yes, there's a very high probability that you would need to submit self-identification about your facility to the FDA. So the first question is, do you manufacture a human generic API or a finished dosage form? And that's pretty straightforward, yes or no. And then secondly, is your facility identified in a drug listing? So that's a little bit of a subtle question. If you points back to the fact that there's a type of application, an ANDA, that is most likely connected to your product. And then if you answer yes, then, okay, then you need to take some notes and learn about how to do this self-identification. Now, there is, that's the tip of the iceberg. If you dive into this topic a little bit further, there's a chart that we prepared to do a comparison between those facilities that need to pay the user fee and those facilities that need to self-identify themselves to the FDA. So you start off with the first couple rows here, and those human generic drug facilities that manufacture a active pharmaceutical ingredient or a finished dosage form, whether it's a manufacturer or a CMO, they are responsible for both. Pretty straightforward. And then it starts to get a little tricky. So there's some questions about whether the packaging or labeling operations would be in scope, and typically yes, both for the user fee and the self-AD. Now, this is where it gets a little tricky. So the FDA carves out those particular facilities that are performing testing, repackaging, or relabeling, and indicates that they do not have to have a facility fee, but they still have to self-identify their facilities. And then there's some other scenarios. We won't go through all those. I don't think they happen too often, but you see that just because you're a human generic drug facility does not necessarily mean you have to pay the user fee. There are some exceptions, and if you fall into those, obviously you want to exercise that and save the funds for not make the payment, but you still do need to submit the self-identification data. And when someone refers to, oh, are we liable for good ID, or are we responsible for GDUFA? You have to understand the context. Well, what do you mean by complying with GDUFA? Do you mean the user fee portion of it, or do you mean the self-identification portion of it? Now, for the most time, it's the same answer, but be aware there could be some exceptions there. Now, in the event that you do need to self-identify information about your facility, the FDA does keep a list, and this is the the nice list. This is the list that you want to be on. This is all the facilities that have submitted their data, and it shows. I just picked this up recently for the fiscal year of 2023. You can see that facility name, the FDA establishment identifier, address, registrant, and so on, and business operations are all charted and made public. So it's very easy to see who's on this list. If you are in the business and you don't see your name on there, that is not a good thing. You should make sure that you do your self-identification, and then your facility will show up on this particular list. So Erin, let's move on, see what we have next.
Okay. So what products are in scope for complying to FDA self-identification requirements? Oh, all of these acronyms are tripping me up.
Yeah, I know. Well, we've kind of alluded to those products, Aaron. We talked about those active pharmaceutical ingredients. We didn't
Mhm.
mention specifically about the bulk unfinished products and the drugs for further processing. We'll mention it here, whether it's an unfinished drug or the finished dosage form. All those related to a generic are in scope, but you should be aware that there's some products that are not in scope. So all those types of products that we mentioned on the prescription side of the coin, they are out of scope. So this is certainly not apply here to the generic drug GDUFA self-ID. And then the human biologics and veterinary products for the animal drugs are also not in scope. What's the next question you have there, Aaron?
Okay, so again, timing. That's what everyone's
Yep.
concerned about. How much and when? They are the biggest
Right.
question. When does the generic facility self-ID need to be submitted to the FDA?
All right, so we talked about a date earlier. October 1 was a deadline for submitting the monetary, the user fees. So that was a financial deadline. Now we're talking about reporting data and self-identifying your product, and that has a different date. Who knows why, but it is what it is. That date is actually a month in duration. Every year, basically the month of May, from May 1 through June 1st, there's this window that you do need to submit your self-identification data to the FDA. It's not accepted if it's early, and you certainly don't want to be late. So this is something that you'll need to schedule. If necessary, maybe plan your vacations around something other than May. But it's this window that is available, and that's it. So you want to keep that in mind. Now, if we were to take a look at your schedule of submissions throughout the year, it's really busy. We won't go into all these particular, submission requirements, but there are, all kinds of establishment registration and drug labeling, listing, and so on. But right here, kind of in the middle, in May 1 to June 1, is this self-identification. So put that on the calendar. Block it off. Make sure that you meet that particular deadline. Aaron, I think we're ready for the next question.
Great. And just a note real quick, the rest of those requirements that are there, we do have a lot of information on our Knowledge Center on all of these. So if you guys have any questions, obviously you can reach out to us, but also check out the Knowledge Center as well. Sorry, Karen. Back to the next question.
Yep.
What happens if I miss the submission deadlines for the FDA self-identification?
Well, we talked about missing the financial payment for the user fee and how you want to certainly avoid that. It has the same implication. I was not aware of a naughty list that the FDA publishes. They really only show the the good, nice list of people that do meet the deadline. So your absence on that is significant. But more importantly, the discussion that we had earlier about misbranding, that does in fact apply here if you miss this 1 month window for self-identification. So everything that we said earlier, the product's misbranded, you can't ship across state lines, you can't import into the U.S., and it could be elevated into possible injunction procedures. Aaron, let's move on to the next one.
All right. So if sorry, and I think there's a little typo on there. If I registered my drug establishment, do I also have to submit a facility self-identification?
Yeah, it sounds redundant, but
Yes,
unfortunately the answer is yes. And the reason that we have heard from the FDA is that these two particular reports, first your establishment registration for many different drug types. It's kind of the universal establishment registration for all pharma, prescription, generics, and so on. That registration goes into a certain database and has various uses and functions inside the FDA. The GDUFA generic drug facility self-ID is a different repository. It has slightly different data. And it has different purposes. So there are some, I guess there's an argument and some misunderstandings like, well, if I did one, I don't have to do the other, but that's not the case. A manufacturer will have to submit both of those and through the different time periods. So I didn't, let me go back here real quickly while we're talking about time. Notice the self-IDs in the month of May, but the establishment registration is the fourth quarter, October to the end of December. So it's two different time periods, but you do have responsibility to meet both of those.
Wow.
All right, Erin, I think we're ready for the next one. It looks like we're going to change and dive into the particular data in the submission. So I think you had collected some questions about the actual data.
Okay, so Gary, what data must be included in a generic drug facility self-identification submission?
Well, at a high level, there's two types of data that need to be collected. One is some information about the actual registrant, the party that owns a facility, and the second information is about the facility itself. And the instructions from the FDA are that you should include all the facilities that are owned by the registrant in one document. And we'll talk about that document in a second, the particular fields. But before we go there, you should be very familiar with two very important company identifiers. And these two identifiers are used quite frequently in pharma and actually across the FDA in many different applications. So the first one is this Dun & Bradstreet DUNS number. It's a unique 9-digit number that's assigned to your particular facility address. It's actually unique to a particular business operation at your site, and that is able to be requested and able to be received at no charge. So Dun & Bradstreet does most likely have already looked at your company and has a DUNS number for your facility. You might not be aware of it, but you can request information from Dun & Bradstreet to see if you have one already. If not, it's pretty straightforward to go and follow that website link there to request a new DUNS number for your particular company. Now remember, it will be address specific. So you might have a DUNS number for your site in Atlanta. It would certainly be a different DUNS number for Seattle or whatever, Detroit or Philadelphia. But you'll definitely have to keep that in mind. This is for a particular office and site. The other company identifier is controlled and assigned by the FDA. So FEI, this FDA establishment identifier, has some long-standing use, and it was used and it's still used by the FDA for tracking some of the sites and identifying various locations for inspection purposes. So this is a 10-digit number. And again, it's no cost. You can request an FEI number if you don't already have one, or you can follow that email and check to see if your company already does have one. And this could be for a campus. There's some limitations on how big the campus could be. It really kind of intended for a inspector, FDA inspector, to be able to, negotiate between building to building very quickly. But it might be down the street and around the corner. But there are some limits as to how far away or how broad this particular identifier can be. So those are the two identifiers, and the reason I bring them up is that there are requirements to include them in the data that you report to the FDA for your self-identification. So let's take a look at those particular lists of data sets. On the left, we see a number of fields that are collected for the registrant, company name, and a DUNS number that we talked about. So this is the DUNS number for typically the headquarters of that company, and then the contact information for servicing any questions about the registrant. On the right-hand side, there's some similar fields, but it's quite different. So the company name and DUNS numbers now is for the actual facility. So let's just follow an example here. Maybe the registrant is in Philadelphia and has this particular DUNS number for that company, and yet the actual facility is in Pittsburgh, and it would have a different DUNS number and a corresponding FEI number. Notice the registrant does not have an FEI number. This is really targeted just for the actual establishment, not for a corporation that acts as the registrant. And then there's some other fields down there, the contact information, skipped over the physical address and so on, business operation, and then a business qualifier. So it's not a huge set, but sometimes you have to poke around and find the DUNS number and FEI number if you're doing this for the first time, and then realize that if you're in a position where the registrant might have, I don't know, maybe 10 different establishments and facilities that are operating, you can collect 10 sets of the facility data and match it up with just one set of registrant data and put that all together in a single submission back to the FDA. Erin, I think we're ready for the next one.
All right, great, Gary. So how is the self-identification data submitted to the FDA?
Those that have been familiar with prescription drugs over the years are familiar with that HL7 standard, referred to as structured product labeling, this SPL standard. So there is guidance documents to fill in this particular data that we just looked at into that SPL standard. So the information is captured in that SPL standard, and then once that particular document is written, it is actually an XML-based document, and then the file is submitted to the FDA via the electronic submission gateway, the ESG. So there is all electronic submission going on. This is not an email. It's not a years past there was some delivery by actually regular physical mail. None of that is happening here. It's all done electronically through this electronic submission gateway. Now there are some very good guidance documents the FDA makes available. Here's some links to read about generic drug facilities and the self-identification, some information about the SPL. There's guidance for industry. There's a number of very good documents in addressing the structured product labeling SPL resources page. So that particular page goes through the SPL document, and there's some guidance documents collected in this website just for self-identification, and there's some validation procedures and so on that get down into the weeds, if you will.
Gary, you
Now,
also just did a great webinar about SPL a few weeks ago. So that is up on our website, Upskill with Reed Tech Basics, SPL Basics and Beyond. If anyone wanted to check out the replay, it was really thorough, explaining a lot of the SPL specifics.
yeah, that was a really good reference as well. Yeah. For this particular topic, there are a couple different methods. Once you create that SPL, and you have some options available. So you might have an outsourced service engaged to create that particular data set inside that XML format. The other option is to have either a third-party vendor or an internal tool that would be used to create that SPL content. And the two on the bottom here are FDA offerings, FDA X forms, where you can log in, create an account, and make manual entry to create that SPL file. And then the last one is something called Cedar Direct, where again you log into an account and make it manual entry. Now the last one is a little different in that once you're done entering data, make sure it's validated and so on, there is a connection over to the FDA where there's a direct connection. The first three that I talked about, you will have an output of an SPL file, and then that needs to be submitted through account that you're able to set up with Electronic Submission Gateway. So that you might be using that account for other types of data and document submissions. So this is able to be submitted through Electronic Submission Gateway. I would say 95% of the time it's going to go to the Center for Drug Evaluation and Review, CDER. And there are a few drugs that would fall under the CBER jurisdiction, but for the most part, it's always going to be CDER. And then in the event that this is successful and you were able to pass through all these steps along the way, this is the nice list out here where your facility would show up on that particular list, indicating that you had made a data submission. Aaron, let me stop there and see. I think you had another poll question lined up. Why don't we do that now?
Just one more poll, and we do want to be respectful of everyone's time, so I'll only leave this open for a few seconds, and then we only have just a few more slides after this. So how are you currently making your GDUFA submissions? Through Reed Tech, through a different third-party vendor, through the free FDA tools. We have not been making GDUFA submissions, but should be, or finally, we are not required to make GDUFA submissions. So we'll give that about another 10 seconds or so. Okay. All right, this is actually moving all over the place as you guys vote. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and close this poll now. And it actually looks like 50-50, 50% are using the free FDA tool and 50% are not required to make GDUFA submissions. So Gary, why don't you go ahead and show them why the best solution would be to use Reed Tech.
All right, well, let's touch on that.
Yeah.
There's a couple things that we want to share with you folks in the event that you are new to making these submissions, and May's just around the corner here. So you're in this window, or if you want to switch to a different method, it has not been working for you, and it's maybe there's some labor-intensive activities that you just prefer not to get into, and anyway, there is this opportunity to work with Reed Tech and change the way in which you meet this particular requirement. So the first thing we'll do is take a look at the diagram. Now, this looks very similar to what we were talking about earlier, but we have put RETEC in the middle here as the third-party vendor that accepts data, and we have some standardized custom data collection form templates to receive that data for all your different facilities and also for the registrant. And then we have, there's some value added here. We go through the validation workflow and reporting it and building the actual XML file, the SPL file, and doing some data comparisons, make sure that all the data that you provided to us actually did make it into that XML file. And then I would say that most of the clients that we support would have us go ahead and submit that through the electronic submission gateway and move it over to the FDA. There is a alternate option where we could return that not only for your storage, but you might want to turn that around and submit that on your own to the FDA. But either way, that SPL then needs to show up at the FDA. They review it, and once it passes all the criteria, it goes into that GDUFA facility self-ID test list. If there's any questions about that, we work very closely with our labelers. Go ahead and contact us. This works extremely well, and we're knowledgeable on this data set, and it's one of the many SPL types that we support, and would be glad to talk a little bit more about that. The last slide here that I want to touch on would be probably for homework in the event that you are considering RETEC. We won't go into this, but there's a number of benefits that you could leverage our expertise and the ability for you to save time and kind of automate this process. With that, Erin, let me go back to you to see if any live questions had come in while we were going through these particular topics.
So Gary, we are just a little bit over, and most of the questions were extremely specific to certain customers. So I think I'll just have our team follow up individually on these questions that we did get. And of course, if anyone has any questions after the webinar, definitely feel free to reach out to us, pharma@readtech.com. Our phone number is right there as well. And of course, as we mentioned, you can expect to receive these slides and recording in your email in the next day or so. So thank you so much, Gary, for sharing all of this with us. That was definitely, I even learned some new stuff about GDUFA, so very appreciative. And thank you to everyone who joined us today. We hope you enjoyed the topic, and we hope to see you on our next webinar as well. Have a great afternoon, everyone.
Yep, thank you. Bye now.